On a hot summer day in Florida, a 2-year-old girl vanished without a trace. For 31 days, nobody called the police. No missing person report. No desperate search. No public plea for help. Instead, her mother went shopping, got a tattoo, partied with friends, and told elaborate lies about where her daughter was. When the truth finally emerged, America became obsessed with one question. How could a mother behave this way if her child was missing? And when the trial ended with a verdict that shocked millions, many people believed justice had failed. This is the story of Caylee Anthony, the little girl whose death became one of the most controversial criminal cases in modern American history. Caylee Marie Anthony was born on August 9, 2005 in Orlando, Florida. To friends and family, she was a cheerful and energetic child with a bright smile and a playful personality. She lived primarily with her mother, Caylee Anthony, in the home of Caylee's parents, George and Cindy Anthony. From the outside, the family appeared relatively normal. But beneath the surface, tensions were growing. Caylee often clashed with her parents. Questions surrounded her lifestyle, her employment, and her honesty. Family members would later describe a pattern of lying that had existed for years. Still, nobody could have imagined the nightmare that was about to unfold. By the summer of 2008, Caylee was nearly 3 years old, and then she suddenly disappeared. Investigators believe that Caylee was last seen alive sometime in June 2008. Exactly what happened remains one of the biggest mysteries in the case. What shocked police later was not only the disappearance itself, but what happened afterward. Days passed, then weeks, yet nobody contacted law enforcement. For over a month, Caylee's whereabouts remained unknown. The alarm was finally raised on July 15, 2008, when Caylee's mother, Cindy Anthony, called 911. The call would become one of the most famous emergency calls in American criminal history. Cindy told dispatchers that she had not seen her granddaughter for several weeks. But there was something else, something deeply disturbing. She reported that Caylee's car smelled as though a dead body had been inside it. The statement immediately caught investigators' attention. A missing child, 31 days unaccounted for, and a vehicle reportedly carrying the smell of human decomposition. Police knew they were dealing with something serious. When detectives questioned Caylee Anthony, they expected a frightened mother desperately searching for her child. Instead, they encountered a bizarre series of stories. Caylee claimed that Caylee had been kidnapped by a nanny named Zenaida Gonzalez. According to her, this nanny had disappeared along with the child. Detectives quickly began investigating. There was only one problem. The nanny didn't seem to exist. As police dug deeper, more inconsistencies appeared. Caylee claimed she worked at Universal Studios. Detectives accompanied her to the property. Confidently, she walked through office buildings and hallways. Then suddenly she stopped. Finally, she admitted the truth. She didn't work there at all. She had lied. Investigators were stunned. At a time when every second mattered, Caylee had sent police chasing false leads, while Caylee remained missing. The lies continued to pile up. Friends later reported that during the period when Caylee was supposedly missing, Caylee appeared unusually carefree. She went out with friends. She attended parties. She entered a nightclub competition. Photos showed her smiling and enjoying herself. To many observers, her behavior seemed impossible to understand. How could a mother act this way if her daughter was truly missing? The question would haunt the entire investigation. One detail became particularly controversial. Only days after Caylee disappeared, Caylee got a tattoo. The tattoo read Bella Vita. In Italian, the phrase means beautiful life. Images of the tattoo spread rapidly through television news broadcasts across America. For prosecutors, it became a powerful symbol. They argued that while her daughter was gone, Caylee appeared to be celebrating freedom. Defense attorneys would later argue that appearances can be misleading and that people react differently to trauma. But public opinion was already turning. As media coverage intensified, Caylee Anthony became one of the most hated women in America. Television networks covered every development. Thousands of people followed the story daily. The nation wanted answers, and investigators were running out of time. Law enforcement agencies launched extensive searches across Central Florida. Volunteers joined the effort. Search teams combed wooded areas, lakes, and neighborhoods. Tips poured in from across the country. Every possible lead was investigated. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined Caylee's car. Reports suggested that the trunk contained signs consistent with decomposition. Hair evidence was recovered. Scientists analyzed air samples and other materials found inside the vehicle. The findings became a major focus of the investigation. However, forensic interpretations would later become a subject of intense disagreement during the trial. As the search continued, fear grew that Caylee might never be found alive. Months passed without answers. Then, in December 2008, everything changed. On December 11, 2008, a utility worker made a horrifying discovery in a wooded area near the Anthony family home. Human skeletal remains were found partially concealed among brush and debris. Authorities rushed to the scene. Soon, investigators confirmed the remains belonged to Caylee Anthony. The discovery devastated the community. The little girl whose face had appeared on television screens across America was gone. Now investigators faced an even more difficult challenge, determining how she died. Because of the condition of the remains, establishing a precise cause of death proved extremely difficult. However, one detail immediately attracted attention. Duct tape had been found associated with the remains. Prosecutors would later argue that this pointed toward homicide. The defense strongly disagreed. The battle lines for one of America's most famous trials were being drawn. In October 2008, before Caylee's remains were even discovered, prosecutors had already charged Caylee Anthony with first-degree murder and several related offenses. After the remains were identified, the case intensified dramatically. The state sought the death penalty. Prosecutors developed a theory that Caylee had intentionally killed Caylee so she could escape parental responsibilities and pursue a carefree lifestyle. According to the prosecution, the evidence painted a clear picture. The lies, the suspicious behavior, the smell in the vehicle, the forensic findings, and the discovery of Caylee's remains. Together, they argued, these facts pointed toward murder. But the defense had a very different story, and it would change the direction of the entire case. When the trial began in 2011, millions of Americans watched closely. The defense team presented a shocking alternative explanation. They claimed Caylee had accidentally drowned in the family's swimming pool. According to the defense, the death was a tragic accident rather than a murder. They further alleged that George Anthony had helped conceal what happened. These accusations stunned the courtroom. Prosecutors fiercely rejected the claims. Yet the defense had achieved an important objective. They introduced reasonable doubt. And in a criminal trial, reasonable doubt can change everything. The battle that followed would become one of the most watched courtroom dramas in American history. For 6 weeks, jurors heard testimony from forensic scientists, investigators, family members, and expert witnesses. Every piece of evidence was dissected. Every inconsistency was examined. Television commentators debated the case daily. Millions believed the prosecution had presented overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Others argued that suspicion alone was not enough. One major problem haunted prosecutors. Nobody could definitively explain exactly how Caylee died. Without a clear cause of death, proving first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt became extraordinarily difficult. And that weakness would prove decisive. On July 5, 2011, the jury delivered its verdict. Caylee Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated child abuse, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child. The courtroom fell silent. Across America, people reacted with disbelief. Many expected a murder conviction. Instead, Caylee Anthony walked free on the most serious charges. She was convicted only of providing false information to law enforcement. Public outrage exploded. News networks interrupted programming. Social media erupted. For many Americans, the verdict became synonymous with a failure of justice. But legally, the jury had concluded that prosecutors hadn't proven murder beyond a reasonable doubt. And under the American justice system, that standard is everything. More than a decade later, the death of Caylee Anthony remains one of the most debated criminal cases in American history. Everyone agrees on one heartbreaking fact: a little girl lost her life far too young. But many of the most important questions remain unanswered. How exactly did Caylee die? Was it an accident? Was it murder? Did someone cover up the truth? Or will the full story never be known? The jury reached its decision, but public opinion never did. For some, Caylee Anthony is a woman wrongly accused in a case built on suspicion. For others, she escaped responsibility for the death of her daughter. And that is why, years later, the name Caylee Anthony still evokes strong emotions. Because despite countless hours of investigation, a sensational trial, and worldwide media coverage, the central mystery remains unsolved.